The sun beat down on Redemption Gulch, a relentless oven baking the already parched earth. Dust devils danced in the distance, mirroring the unease stirring in the town. For weeks, whispers of the outlaw Silas the Viper Blackwood had slithered through the saloon doors and across the general store counter. Blackwood, a man whose reputation preceded him like a thunderclap before a storm, was known for his cold efficiency and a trail of broken laws stretching from Texas to the Dakota Territories. Today, those whispers became a chilling reality. Just after noon, a lone rider emerged from the shimmering heat haze, silhouetted against the blinding sky. His black duster flapped like a vulture's wings, and the glint of steel on his hip was undeniable. Silas Blackwood had arrived, the few souls brave enough to be out on the dusty main street, scattered like dry leaves in a gust of wind, diving into doorways and behind wagons. Children, playing in the meager shade of the mercantile, froze, their games forgotten as the oppressive silence of fear descended. Blackwood dismounted in front of the town's only bank, his spurs jingling with an ominous rhythm. His eyes, cold and sharp as chipped flint, scanned the street, daring anyone to meet his gaze. A tremor of collective dread ran through Redemption Gulch. This wasn't just another bandit passing through. This was Silas Blackwood, and his presence promised nothing but trouble. Inside the bank, the cashier, a nervous young man named Thomas, fumbled with the ledger, his hands clammy. He'd heard the stories, the gruesome details of Blackwood's ruthlessness. As the heavy wooden doors creaked open, a gasp escaped his lips. Blackwood stepped inside, his shadow falling across the polished counter. "Fill the bags." Blackwood's voice was a low growl, devoid of any inflection. "And quickly, unless you prefer a faster exit from this world." But Blackwood wasn't just after the bank's coffers. As the money was being grudgingly handed over, a small figure emerged from the back office. Sarah Miller, the bank owner's spirited 10-year-old daughter, curious as ever, had slipped past her father, drawn by the commotion. Her bright blue eyes widened as they landed on the menacing figure. Blackwood's gaze, momentarily diverted from the loot, settled on the girl. A dark, predatory glint appeared in his eyes. Without a word, he grabbed Sarah, hoisting her over his shoulder with an unnerving ease. A strangled cry escaped her father, bursting from the back office. But Blackwood was already retreating, the bags of money clutched in one hand, Sarah struggling in the other. He mounted his horse in a single, fluid motion, and with a chilling sneer, rode out of Redemption Gulch as quickly as he had arrived, leaving behind a town choked with dust, fear, and the agonizing wails of a father who had just lost his daughter. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and red, a stark contrast to the darkness that had just befallen the town. The clock was ticking. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Mr. Miller, Sarah's father, stumbled out of the bank, his face ashen, screaming his daughter's name into the swirling dust left by Blackwood's horse. Townsfolk, who had moments before been paralyzed by fear, now rushed to his side, offering useless platitudes and hollow reassurances. The local sheriff, a portly, well-meaning man named Jebediah, finally emerged from his office, strapping on his gun belt with hands that trembled. He was a good man, but no match for the likes of Silas Blackwood. The reality of their helplessness settled over Redemption Gulch like a heavy shroud. Night fell, bringing with it a deceptive coolness that did little to calm the burning anxiety in the town. Lamps flickered in windows, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the stillness. Mr. Miller sat on the dusty porch of his bank, a shotgun across his lap, his eyes fixed on the empty road, a silent vigil against the encroaching darkness and the terrifying unknown. His wife, Eliza, hovered nearby, her face etched with grief, occasionally murmuring words of comfort that neither of them truly believed. The town's general store owner, old Mrs. Henderson, brought them a weak, lukewarm tea, her own eyes red-rimmed from weeping. Meanwhile, a few miles outside Redemption Gulch, another figure was approaching. A lone rider, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, steadily made his way across the rugged terrain. He was a man of few words, known only by his reputation and the chilling accuracy of his aim. Marshal Judson, the Hawk, Hayes. Hayes was a bounty hunter, but not one driven by greed alone. Justice, in his own unyielding way, was his true north. He rode with an almost preternatural calm, his eyes scanning the horizon, his hand resting instinctively on the worn handle of his Colt. The wind whispered tales of desperation, carrying the scent of dust and distant despair. He had a sixth sense for trouble, and the heavy atmosphere hanging over Redemption Gulch was palpable, even from afar. The Hawk was circling, unknowingly drawn to a town teetering on the edge of utter despair. A little before sundown, the rumble of hooves shattered the strained silence of Redemption Gulch. Every head snapped up, hope and fear warring in their eyes. The silhouette of a man on horseback, tall and lean, emerged from the orange glow of the setting sun. He was a stranger, draped in a dust-covered leather duster, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring his face. As he drew closer, the townsfolk could make out the steely glint in his eyes and the unmistakable air of quiet authority that clung to him like a second skin. It was Marshal Judson Hayes. He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle, his movements economical and precise. His gaze swept over the worried faces, lingering for a moment on the distraught figure of Mr. Miller. Sheriff Jebediah, still feeling out of his depth, approached cautiously. "Evening, stranger. What brings you to Redemption Gulch?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. Hayes's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, cutting through the twilight hush. "Heard tell of trouble. A man named Blackwood. A girl. Kidnapped." His words were not a question, but a statement of grim fact. The townsfolk collectively exhaled. This man knew. He wasn't just passing through. Mr. Miller, his eyes bloodshot from tears and lack of sleep, pushed through the small crowd. You're a bounty hunter?" His voice was hoarse with desperation. Hayes nodded slowly. "Some call me that. Others call me the Hawk. I track what needs tracking." His gaze met Mr. Miller's, and for the first time, a flicker of something akin to resolve sparked in the grieving father's eyes. "I'm here for Silas Blackwood, and for the girl." A ripple of relief, tentative but real, spread through the small crowd. They had prayed for a miracle, for someone capable of standing against the terror Blackwood represented. Judson Hayes, with his quiet confidence and formidable reputation, seemed to be the answer to those desperate prayers. The town had been cloaked in despair, but with the arrival of the Hawk, a fragile ember of hope began to glow in the encroaching darkness. He asked for a fresh horse and provisions, then began to question the witnesses, his questions sharp and to the point, leaving no room for doubt about his intentions. The hunt was on. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, but for Marshal Judson Hayes there was no time for appreciation. While the town of Redemption Gulch was still stirring from a fitful night's sleep, Hayes was already at the edge of town, meticulously examining the tracks left by Blackwood's horse. The ground, still damp from a light dew, offered clear impressions. He bent low, his keen eyes picking out details others would have missed, the slight drag of a hoof, the distinct pattern of the shoe. He deduced not only the direction, but also the approximate speed of Blackwood's departure. Sheriff Jebediah, despite his earlier trepidation, appeared with a small group of townsfolk, offering their help. Hayes, while appreciating the gesture, politely but firmly declined. "This isn't a posse job," he stated, his voice devoid of arrogance, simply stating a truth. "Blackwood's a ghost. Too many tracks will just make it harder." He knew the dangers of a large, uncoordinated group against a seasoned outlaw. This hunt required precision, stealth, and unwavering focus. Mr. Miller, though exhausted, insisted on contributing, providing Hayes with a detailed description of Blackwood's horse and any distinguishing features he could recall from the brief, terrifying encounter. Hayes listened intently, filing away every piece of information. Eliza Miller, Sarah's mother, pressed a small hand-stitched doll into Hayes's hand. "For Sarah," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Hayes looked at the doll, then at Eliza, a flicker of something unreadable in his usually impassive eyes. He tucked the doll carefully into his saddlebag. With a final nod to the anxious faces, Hayes mounted his horse. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant possibility. He followed Blackwood's trail, a faint but steady path leading westward towards the jagged peaks of the Diablo Mountains. The terrain grew rougher, the land more unforgiving, but Hayes moved with the unwavering determination of a predator. He was on the scent, and he wouldn't rest until he found his prey, and more importantly, the innocent life Blackwood had stolen. The journey would be long and perilous, but for Judson Hayes, failure was not an option. Remember, this is just the beginning of a thrilling adventure. For more exciting stories and to see how this one unfolds, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The trail led Judson Hayes deep into the unforgiving landscape of the Diablo Mountains. The air grew thinner, the days hotter, and the nights bitingly cold. He rode for hours without rest, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his senses heightened. Blackwood was cunning, leaving false trails, crossing streams to mask his scent, and utilizing the rough terrain to his advantage. Yet Hayes, with years of experience tracking the worst of men, was relentless. He read the land like an open book, a broken twig here, a disturbed stone there, a faint hoofprint in the dust, each a breadcrumb leading him closer. The silence of the wilderness was broken only by the creak of his saddle, the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves, and the occasional cry of a distant hawk, a sound that seemed to mock his own moniker. He rationed his water and dried jerky, knowing that every ounce of sustenance was vital. The physical toll was immense, but the image of Sarah Miller's distraught parents and the knowledge of an innocent child in the clutches of a merciless outlaw fueled his unwavering resolve. He often thought of the small, hand-stitched doll, a silent reminder of the fragility of the life he was trying to save. Days blurred into a relentless pursuit. Hayes encountered minor setbacks, a flash flood that temporarily obscured the trail, a brief tense standoff with a pair of opportunistic drifters who quickly realized their mistake when confronted by his steely gaze. He pressed on, his focus unbroken. The scenery was breathtakingly beautiful in its harshness, towering red rock formations, deep canyons echoing with unseen life, and vast open plains stretching endlessly. But Hayes saw none of it, his mind solely fixed on the tracks, the pursuit, and the desperate race against time. He knew Blackwood would be pushing hard, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and Redemption Gulch. The bounty hunter matched his pace, refusing to yield an inch. After days of relentless pursuit, Hayes finally caught a break. He spotted a faint wisp of smoke curling lazily into the sky from a hidden ravine. It was a telltale sign of a recent campfire. His heart quickened, a rare surge of adrenaline coursing through him. Blackwood was close. He dismounted, tying his horse to a stunted juniper tree, and proceeded on foot, moving with the stealth of a mountain cat. Every muscle in his body was tense, his hand hovering over the grip of his revolver. As he crept closer, the sounds of a crackling fire and muffled voices became clearer. He peered over the edge of the ravine, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of dusk. Below, nestled in a small alcove, was Blackwood's camp. Two other men, rough-looking outlaws, sat around a small fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. And then he saw her, Sarah Miller, huddled near the fire, her small frame trembling, her eyes wide with fear. She was alive. A wave of profound relief washed over Hayes, quickly replaced by a renewed surge of determination. He watched, unnoticed, for a long time, observing their routine, their weapons, and their positions. Blackwood, always cautious, had posted one of his men as a lookout, but the man seemed more interested in his tobacco chew than his surroundings. Hayes noted Sarah's attempts to appear small and unnoticeable, a desperate strategy of survival. He saw Blackwood bark an order at her, and the girl flinched, pulling further into herself. The sight ignited a cold fury within Hayes. He knew he couldn't rush in. 3 armed men against one, especially with a child's life at stake, required careful planning. He pulled back from the edge of the ravine, his mind already formulating a strategy. The cover of darkness would be his greatest ally. He would wait for the dead of night, for sleep to claim Blackwood's men. Then and only then would he make his move. The long journey, the exhaustion, the harsh elements, it all culminated in this moment. The glimmer of hope was real, but the danger was still immense. The desert night was a canvas of deep indigo, pierced by 1,000 stars. A chill wind, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, swept through the ravine. Judson Hayes moved like a shadow, his footsteps silent on the rocky ground. The campfire below had dwindled to embers, casting flickering light on the sleeping forms of Blackwood's men. Blackwood himself, surprisingly, was still awake, hunched over, sharpening a knife, his movements methodical and unsettling. Sarah was curled up some distance away, wrapped in a thin blanket, her small body barely visible in the gloom. Hayes knew this was his moment. He had meticulously planned his approach, accounting for every rock and crevice. He crept to the edge of the camp, his revolver drawn, the metal cold and comforting in his hand. With a swift, decisive movement, he disarmed the sleeping lookout, securing his rifle. The other sleeping outlaw was next, his pistol silently removed. Now only Blackwood remained. Hayes stepped into the faint circle of light, his voice a low, commanding whisper that cut through the silence. "Blackwood, it's over." Silas Blackwood's head snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise. He dropped the knife, his hand instinctively going for the pistol holstered at his hip. But Hayes was faster. A single, precise shot rang out, echoing briefly in the confined space. Blackwood cried out, clutching his shoulder as he crumpled to the ground, his gun falling uselessly from his grasp. The other outlaw, startled awake by the gunshot, scrambled to his feet, disoriented and reaching for his weapon, only to be met by Hayes's unyielding gaze and the cold barrel of his revolver. "Don't move," Hayes commanded, his voice firm and unwavering. The outlaw froze, recognizing the steely resolve in the bounty hunter's eyes. Hayes moved quickly, securing Blackwood and the other outlaw with ropes he carried for just such an occasion. Then he turned to Sarah. The little girl was awake, her eyes wide with terror, but also a flicker of something else. Confusion, then dawning recognition. Hayes knelt, his gruff voice softening slightly. "It's all right, little one. You're safe now." He offered her the hand-stitched doll, a gesture that brought a fragile smile to her lips. The immediate danger was over, but the journey back to Redemption Gulch, with 2 dangerous prisoners and a traumatized child, was still ahead. Don't miss the thrilling conclusion to this story. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on what happens next. The return journey was slow and arduous, but filled with a different kind of tension. Hayes kept a watchful eye on Blackwood and his accomplice, both bound and disarmed. He knew Blackwood was a desperate man, capable of anything. Sarah, still frightened but visibly relieved, rode on Hayes's spare horse, sometimes dozing, sometimes gazing at the passing landscape with wide, reflective eyes. Hayes spoke to her quietly when she was awake, reassuring her, asking about her favorite things, trying to distract her from the ordeal she had endured. He even shared some of his dried fruit, a rare treat. The weather, as if mirroring the shift in circumstances, turned milder. The oppressive heat of the previous days gave way to a gentle breeze. They stopped often, resting for short periods, and Hayes made sure Sarah was as comfortable as possible. He noticed her growing trust in him, a fragile bond forged in the crucible of fear and rescue. She clung to the doll her mother had given him, a tangible link to home. Blackwood, despite his injury, maintained a stony silence, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect for Hayes. His accomplice occasionally grumbled, complaining about their bindings, but a sharp glance from Hayes quickly silenced him. The physical discomfort of the journey was immense for all of them, but for Hayes it was overshadowed by the profound responsibility he felt for Sarah's safe return. He was keenly aware of the psychological toll this ordeal had taken on the young girl. As they drew closer to Redemption Gulch, the landscape began to look more familiar. The thought of reuniting Sarah with her parents spurred Hayes onward, pushing through his own exhaustion. The sun, now a friendly golden orb, began its descent once more, painting the familiar outlines of the distant town in a comforting glow. The arduous trek was nearing its end, and with it, the promise of resolution. As the familiar dusty road leading into Redemption Gulch came into view, a wave of relief washed over Judson Hayes. The town was still. But then, as they drew closer, a murmur started, growing quickly into a joyous roar. Word had spread like wildfire. A lone figure on horseback, with two bound men in tow and a small girl by his side, was approaching. Mr. and Mrs. Miller were the first to burst from the crowd, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming hope. When Sarah saw them, a joyful cry escaped her lips, and she practically tumbled off the horse, running into their open arms. The reunion was tearful, overflowing with raw emotion. Mr. Miller held his daughter tightly, tears streaming down his face, while Eliza cradled Sarah's head, whispering words of endless love and relief. The hand-stitched doll, still clutched in Sarah's hand, was a silent witness to their reunion. Sheriff Jebediah, overwhelmed with relief, quickly took charge of Blackwood and his accomplice, leading them towards the small, sturdy jailhouse. The townsfolk erupted in cheers, their gratitude palpable. They surrounded Hayes, offering him food, drink, and heartfelt thanks. He was no longer just the hawk, the feared bounty hunter. He was their savior, the man who had brought hope back to their beleaguered town. Hayes, ever the man of few words, accepted their gratitude with a quiet nod. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction, a rare emotion that cut through his usual stoicism. Seeing Sarah safe in her parents' arms, seeing the relief on their faces, was the only reward he truly needed. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty main street, but Redemption Gulch was no longer shrouded in despair. It was bathed in the warm glow of triumph and relief, a testament to the courage of one man and the enduring power of community. The days following Blackwood's capture and Sarah's return saw a profound shift in Redemption Gulch. The town, once gripped by fear, now hummed with a renewed sense of life and purpose. Blackwood and his accomplice were quickly transferred to a larger territorial jail, their reign of terror truly over. Mr. Miller, his daughter safe, felt a weight lifted from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. Sarah, though still a little withdrawn from her ordeal, slowly began to reclaim her youthful exuberance, her laughter once again echoing through the bank. The townsfolk, forever grateful to Judson Hayes, treated him with a reverence that bordered on awe. Hayes, however, was not a man to linger in the limelight. He spent a quiet morning at the saloon, enjoying a simple breakfast and a strong coffee, listening to the murmur of conversations, the everyday sounds of a town healing. He saw Mr. Miller walking hand in hand with Sarah, heading towards the general store, a picture of renewed normalcy. He exchanged a brief, understanding nod with Sheriff Jebediah, who seemed to stand a little taller, a little more confident. His horse was rested, his provisions replenished. The bounty, a substantial sum, had been offered, but Hayes had only taken a small portion, enough to cover his expenses. The rest, he insisted, should go towards rebuilding the town and helping those affected by Blackwood's depredations. He felt a rare sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction in a job well done. The mission was complete. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows down the main street, Judson Hayes swung into his saddle. He offered a final, almost imperceptible nod to the silent town, a silent farewell. He was a wanderer, a man of the open road, driven by an internal compass that always pointed towards justice wherever it might be needed. The dust swirled around his horse's hooves as he rode out of Redemption Gulch, leaving behind a town reborn and a family forever grateful. He was the hawk, always vigilant, always ready for the next call of duty, riding towards the endless horizon, a silent guardian of the untamed West. The world was vast, and there was always another trail to follow. Thank you for watching. A wanted gunslinger kidnapped the girl, but a feared bounty hunter rode into town before sundown. We hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories and adventures.